The colonization of South America, from conquest to independence. Imagine a continent filled with empires of gold, towering cities carved into mountains, and vast trade networks stretching across jungles, deserts, and highlands. Now imagine the moment when foreign sails appeared on the horizon, carrying men whose hunger for land, faith, and wealth would change the fate of millions forever. This is the story of how South America was transformed, from indigenous civilizations to colonial empires, and finally, to the birth of modern nations. The colonization of South America is one of the most dramatic and complex episodes in world history. In less than a century, ancient civilizations that had thrived for centuries, like the Inca Empire, the Muisca Confederation, and countless others, were brought under European control. This transformation was not simply a military conquest, it was a profound reshaping of societies, economies, cultures, and identities. From the first European landfalls in the late 15th century to the waves of independence movements in the 19th century, the story of South America's colonization is a tale of ambition, exploitation, adaptation, and resistance. It is also a story that still shapes the region's political and cultural landscapes today. Before the conquest, South America, on the eve of 1492. Before Europeans set foot on the continent, South America was home to a vast diversity of peoples, languages, and political systems. The Inca Empire, stretching from present-day Colombia to Chile, the Inca were masters of administration, agriculture, and engineering. Their capital, Cusco, was the heart of a network connected by over 40,000 kilometers of roads. Terraced farming, advanced irrigation, and a state-run economy sustained millions. The Muisca Confederation in what is now Colombia controlled rich gold resources and had a strong tradition of trade and ceremonial rule. The Mapuche in southern Chile and Argentina resisted centralized rule and thrived in their own warrior society. Dozens of Amazonian societies lived in complex ecological harmony with the rainforest, practicing agriculture, fishing, and long-distance trade. These civilizations were far from static. They had their own wars, alliances, and shifting powers, but they were about to face an entirely new kind of threat. European arrival, Columbus and the Spanish advance. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas divided the New World between Spain and Portugal, a decision made without the consent of any of the millions already living there. Portugal received the eastern portion of South America, modern-day Brazil, while Spain claimed the rest. By the early 1500s, Spanish expeditions were moving south from the Caribbean into the continent's interior. Figures like Francisco Pizarro and Diego de Almagro led expeditions driven by tales of vast wealth, especially the fabled riches of the Inca Empire. In 1532, Pizarro's small force captured Atahualpa, the Inca emperor, in a bold and treacherous ambush at Cajamarca. The ransom demanded, a room filled with gold and two with silver, became one of the largest acts of extortion in history. Even after receiving the ransom, the Spanish executed Atahualpa, plunging the Inca realm into chaos. The Portuguese claim, Brazil. While the Spanish pushed through the Andes and the west coast, the Portuguese were consolidating control over Brazil. Officially discovered in 1500 by Pedro Álvares Cabral, Brazil became the cornerstone of Portugal's South American empire. The Portuguese initially exploited Brazil for its pau-brasil, as Brazil would die, but by the mid-16th century, sugar plantations became the economic backbone. These plantations relied heavily on enslaved African labor, creating one of the largest forced migrations in history. Over the centuries, Brazil would become the single largest importer of enslaved Africans in the Atlantic world. Section 4. Colonial Society and Control. The colonial systems established by Spain and Portugal had similarities, but each was shaped by its own policies. In Spanish South America, territories were divided into viceroyalties, Peru 1542, and later New Granada and Rio de la Plata. The encomienda system granted Spanish settlers control over indigenous labor and tribute. A rigid social hierarchy emerged. Peninsulares, Spaniards born in Europe, at the top. Criollos, Spanish descent born in the Americas, next. Then mestizos, indigenous peoples, and enslaved Africans at the bottom. In Portuguese, Brazil, land was divided into large estates called captaincies. The economy revolved around sugar, later expanding to gold, coffee, and cattle. Social hierarchy was equally strict, with racial mixing creating a diverse but deeply stratified society. Religion played a central role. The Catholic Church not only spread Christianity, but also acted as a political and cultural force, building missions, schools, and influencing governance. Resistance and rebellion. Despite European dominance, colonization was never uncontested. Resistance took many forms. Armed uprisings like the Tupac Amaru Rebellion, 1780 to 1783, in Peru, where indigenous and mestizo fighters challenged Spanish rule. The Mapuche resisted Spanish conquest for centuries, forcing treaties that recognized their autonomy. Maroon communities of escaped enslaved Africans formed free settlements in Brazil, Colombia, and elsewhere, the most famous being Palmares in Brazil. The road to independence. By the late 18th century, a combination of global and local factors set the stage for independence. The Enlightenment spread ideas about liberty, equality, and national sovereignty. The American Revolution, 1776, and French Revolution, 1789, inspired colonial elites. The Napoleonic Wars weakened Spain and Portugal, creating political vacuums. Leaders like Simón Bolívar, José de San Martín, and Bernardo O'Higgins emerged to lead armies against colonial forces. The wars of independence were long and brutal, spanning from 1808 to the 1820s. Bolívar liberated Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and helped create Bolivia. San Martín led campaigns in Argentina, Chile, and Peru. Brazil's independence in 1822 was unique. It became an empire under Dom Pedro I without a large-scale war. By 1830, most of South America was politically independent, though economic and social inequalities persisted. Legacy of colonization. The colonization of South America left deep and lasting legacies. Language and religion. Spanish and Portuguese became dominant languages. Catholicism remains influential. Social inequality. The colonial caste system left enduring racial and economic divisions. Cultural blending. Indigenous, African, and European traditions fused into unique cultural identities. Economic patterns. Export-oriented economies established in colonial times shaped later development. The story of South America's colonization is not just about conquest and domination. It is also about survival, adaptation, and the creation of new identities. The indigenous civilizations that once ruled vast empires were transformed, but their descendants still shape the continent's culture and politics today. The wars of independence were the closing chapter of one era and the beginning of another. Yet, in many ways, the struggles over land, power, and identity that began with colonization continue into the present. History is not only about what was lost, but also about what endured. And in South America, the echoes of colonization still resonate in every city, every language, and every song.